Do you know how the word massacre is defined? Basically, a massacre is an indiscriminate and brutal slaughter of people, and oftentimes those people are unarmed. And that is what happened on September 11th, 1857 at a place called Mountain Meadows. Hello, D-Rock here. Welcome to the channel. Today I'm visiting the site of a massacre that occurred 166 years ago in southwestern Utah. Please join me. There was more involved with this event than what we probably know. A lot was going on in Utah in 1857. Just to mention a few things, there was the Utah War, fighting between Mormons and the U.S. Army, and there was also the sparks that would eventually become the Black Hawk War. Indeed, a very chaotic time. So at this time, a group of immigrants from Arkansas were passing through the area, a large wagon train of men, women, and children en route to California. They reached a spot called Mountain Meadows and made camp. They wouldn't get any farther. So my first time through the area, I was heading north, probably to Enterprise for maybe fishing. I'm not sure, but I saw this sign right here. Mountain Meadows Massacre, National Historic Landmark. And I was like, massacre? Here? In southwestern Utah? I had no idea. No clue what had happened. All right, we're gonna go down and have a look in the area. Now, I'm not a professional historian, so I'm just going to kind of glance over the entire event, and I don't want to misrepresent or misspeak about anything because obviously the tragedy that occurred here, I just want to treat it with utmost respect, so I just want to make sure that what I do say is correct. And here is what occurred out here. In 1857, September of 1857, a wagon train expedition of immigrants from Arkansas were coming through the area. They were en route to California. They were camped out in the valley here. The Mormon Militia Men and the Southern Paiutes killed everyone. Everyone except some small children, between 120 and 140 people. They separated the men, the women and children. They shot the men, and they beat the women and children to death. Now, I could be wrong about what happened to the women and children, but from what I've read and researched, the women and children didn't get the quick deaths that the men did. I could be completely wrong on that, and if I am, I apologize. But what happened here was brutal, absolutely brutal. So there were a few survivors. I think there was 16 small children, something like that, that managed to survive. And by small children, I mean like infants and young, so young that they wouldn't be able to tell the tale, is from what my understanding. And I think some local families took those children in. Everyone else did not make it. And they weren't buried. They were stripped of their clothes, all the valuables were plundered, and their bodies were just left scattered out here. And it took a couple years before the U.S. Army came and buried the remains. At this point, I'm just going to walk through the area and have a look, but it's interesting right now as we're approaching into winter. Everything's kind of browned out here, and it just, you know, not exactly gloomy, but you know, you get the feeling after you know what's happened, what's occurred out here. You know, it's just a solemn feeling. I've felt this in other places where things of this nature have occurred. However, in the spring and summer, when this place is very green, it's just beautiful out here. It's just a lot to take in. So what's kind of intrigued me about this whole area and the actions that occurred here is that I had no clue about it. Now, I'm not from Utah. I'm not Mormon. I'm not from Arkansas. And I don't recollect ever hearing about this. My wife, who is from Utah, she didn't know about this either. She's not from Southwestern Utah, but I've spoken to people that have grown up here, have gone to school here, and I asked them, any point while you're in school, history that is, did you ever hear about the massacre that occurred at Mountain Meadows? And they were all told nope. So they didn't know either. Some of them said the only reason they knew about it was coming through the area and they see the sign, just like I did. So as you come up the path, you'll be presented with this large cairn here, and that's actually a reproduction. There is some signage here explaining what happened here. And as I mentioned just a minute ago, the U.S. Army came here 2 years later and buried a number of bones. And what they did afterwards was they built a giant cairn with a cross, as you can see here, this photo here, kind of in memoriam of that. So that original cairn is no longer here. This is for lack of a better word, replacement of it. But I believe it was vandalized and obviously weathered out. So this is now in place of that, and it's surrounded by a gate. I'm sure this is locked at night, but you can enter this and go in. Flying above the gravesite memorial is the United States flag and the state of Arkansas flag. So I'm going to read a little bit from this plaque, but they did indeed circle the wagons, and as it says here, the wagons were into a circle slightly larger than this fenced area that I'm currently standing in, and 140 people were inside that as the siege began, the attacks began upon them from the Mormon Militia Men. So imagine, if you will, as I walk around this small enclosed area here within the fence, the wagon trains were in a circle, and all up in the hills are men with guns shooting down on you, and you and 120, 140 other people are stuck inside this as this attack continues for days. Inside the memorial are gravestones bearing names of the victims, and these line the fence on all sides. All right, we're gonna continue walking. So there's a podcast called Mormon Stories, and just a couple weeks ago they released an episode about the Mountain Meadows Massacre, and the podcast is about 2 hours long, but it's extremely informative, and I highly recommend a watch or a listen to this. So as you come down the path from the gravesite memorial, you'll encounter this marker here, and I'll read the words, and it says, "Ever remembered, in honor of those who rest in this field. They were innocent and died in unjust attacks that began on September 7th, 1857. They were defending their friends and families who buried them before leaving the protection of their camp. To the other victims of the Mountain Meadows Massacre who lie in unknown graves, rest in peace and be assured you are remembered. So try to imagine, leave your modern world for a moment, travel back to 1857. You're in a group, you're trapped in this field, and in all directions there's people firing upon you, and you don't know why. There's no one to call. There's no help coming. I can only, well, I can't really do anything, honestly. So after doing the research I've done and now being here in person, I'm amazed at how small this area is. As I've walked just in this small area, the gravesite memorial is just past this little building here. This is not a big area, so all these people were just slaughtered in this small field here. I had thought it was just a big valley that went for miles, and this just didn't happen so so tightly, for lack of a better term. I thought it was a little more spread out, but I can't imagine what this must have looked like. And as I mentioned, and as the information states, the victims were simply left out in the field. They were stripped of their clothing, all goods, valuables, watches, necklaces, all that were taken from them, and they were just left to waste away in the elements and from the animals. And it wasn't till 2 years later that the U.S. Army came through and buried the remains of the remains. So I'm at the top of the overlook now, and in front of me is the field where the massacre occurred. Directly as my finger's pointing is the gravesite memorial. And behind me, this is, I highly encourage, if you're visiting this, to come up here and check this out as well. This has some more information. It's got this whole large plaque here. It's got the names of the victims. It also has the names of the children that survived the attack and were eventually returned to their families in northwestern Arkansas. It also has some names of some others, and it's got some more information here. It's a lot to take in, really, but I'll just read this real quickly.
About 140 people were in the caravan that arrived at Mountain Meadows in early 1857. 10 of those people were murdered in the initial attack and siege. About 110 were murdered in the final massacre. Of those 110, 35 were children ages 17 and younger. 13 were women ages 18 and older, 11 of whom were mothers. 33 were men ages 18 and older. 17 children survived. So just down the road from the actual gravesite memorial there's two separate memorials. One is the men's memorial and the other is the women and children's memorial. And I'm currently just down the road at the women's memorial, and there's a marker here, and it says, "In honored remembrance, may we forever remember the women, children, and wounded who died near here on September 11th, 1857 as part of the Mountain Meadows Massacre. They were killed without just cause. Most lie in unmarked graves somewhere in this valley. Only 17 small children survived. They were later reunited with their extended families in Arkansas." So just back up the road is the men's memorial, and just over here past this house is the field where the massacre occurred. But the marker here says, "Never to be forgotten, in memory of the immigrant men and boys from Arkansas massacred here in Mountain Meadows on September 11th, 1857. Their lives were taken prematurely and wrongly by Mormon Militia Men in one of the most tragic episodes in Western American history. May we forever remember and honor those buried in this valley. May we never forget this tragedy, but learn from the past." In the end, about 50 to 60 Mormon militiamen and an unknown number of Paiute Natives were involved in the massacre. Only one person paid for the massacre, a man named John D. Lee. He paid for it 20 years later, 1877. They brought him out here and executed him. All the rest of the people that were associated with the massacre, who knows? So I really don't know what else to say. It's a very profound moment visiting this area, and I sit here and contemplate what it all would have been like to experience, and I mean, there's just no words. If you're in the area, I highly suggest coming and visiting this spot, and it's definitely worth noting that this should be known, it should be remembered what occurred here. And that's it. There's some great things to research and experience as far as the history of this event. And as I mentioned earlier, the Mormon Stories podcast was a good episode. They were pretty detailed about what happened, much better than what I could have done. But there's some material out there, and there you have it. A massacre you may or may not have ever heard of, the Mountain Meadows Massacre in southwestern Utah.